The Calls Appointment subtab combines appointment dates with call history. You can also use this subtab to add, edit, or delete appointments for this specific client, or you can excuse certain dates from calling. Welcome to our video about the Comply Desktop Client Profile Calls Appointment subtab. In a nutshell, this tab combines call history with appointment dates. All of those dates are shown in this scrollable grid, and this grid has display rows and grid height controls like you find in other grids throughout the Comply desktop. We encourage you to watch our separate video entitled Using Desktop Grid Controls to learn how you can fully customize this grid. Above the grid are start and end dates. These control how many rows you see in the grid. Right now we're looking at all of November and December, but let's say we don't need to see November anymore, so let's change the grid to only show December by changing the start date to December 1st, and then click the refresh button. To the right of those dates is a legend describing the different row shading that you might see in the grid, and just to the right of that is a hide checkbox, which is checked by default. Let's uncheck this box so you can see what some of those shaded rows will look like. You'll notice now that beginning with December 1st and 2nd and the 8th and the 9th, that some of these rows are shaded in gray. For this particular court, clients are not required to call in on weekends, so these are considered non-appointment days, and by default we hide them. So we'll go ahead and recheck the hide checkbox. And shortly we'll look at examples of the holiday and excuse shading colors in the grid. Okay, let's look at the grid itself. First, what jumps out at you, and this is by design, are the green, red, and tan icons in the first column. These are intended to be visual cues that allow you to quickly identify if a client has been compliant in their calling history. As such, the green check mark indicates that they did call when they were supposed to. The red X indicates they did not call, and occasionally you may see this tan circle. This indicates that they did call, but they called outside of allowable call hours. And this goes back to one of the reasons that we have the hide checkbox. It will hide the days the client did not have to call. And by hiding these rows, you do not have to look figuratively around certain dates and give thought as to when you should see green check marks and when you should not. The remaining columns are fairly self-explanatory, but let's do a quick review and I'll explain some of the less obvious ones. Appointment date is really the reference column to which all the other columns relate. The next four columns, call time, time zone, minutes, and caller ID, show whether the client called or not to check for an appointment on that given appointment date. Now let's look closely and notice a detail here. For the two rows for December 5th, most of the columns are duplicated, including the two testing times for an appointment on this date. This does not mean the client had two appointments on that date, but reflects the fact that the client called twice for the same appointment day, once the evening before and again on the morning of the appointment date itself. Now, most notably, notice that you can add, edit, and delete appointments directly on this grid. Typically, if you're managing an individual client and assessing how many appointments they've had or will have this month, you're looking here at this subtab. And if you find you'd like to make an adjustment, you can quickly do so, rather than returning to the main calendar tab and hunting and pecking until you find the client. Note that the Add, Edit, and Delete buttons are automatically enabled or disabled depending on the row that is selected on the grid. For example, today is December 20th. If I click on the 12th, none of the buttons are enabled, and that's because I cannot manipulate past appointments in any manner. They are part of the client's permanent record, as they used to tell us back in grade school. If I click a future date where an appointment does not already exist, the Add button lights up, and I can click it and add a future appointment on that date. You'll notice now that the Edit Appointment and Delete Appointment buttons are now enabled and Add is not, and that's because I have an appointment now on the 28th. So let's try the Edit button. Let's suppose I want to change the available testing hours. Click Edit, change the start time, let's say to 11 a.m., and click OK. Finally though, I realize now that I've made a mistake. I've excused this client to go visit family out of town for the week of Christmas, so I want to delete this appointment on the 28th. Click on the date to highlight it, and click the Delete Appointment button. You'll get a confirmation, do you want to delete this date? And yes indeed I do, so I click Yes. So let's do a quick review. On the Client Profile Calls Appointment subtab, you have a lot of information and functionality. The grid combines call history with appointments. You can filter the grid by date range. You can hide or display non-call dates. You can add, edit, or delete appointments directly. And you can excuse or unexcuse dates with the Excuse and Activate buttons. In our next video, we'll talk about the Client and Appointment History subtabs. Thanks for joining us.